She's not human, my daughter-in-law said, tightening her grip on the girl's wrist. She's ours now. I didn't answer right away. At my age, you learn that silence can reveal more than questions ever will. I just stood there in my own living room in Austin, Texas, watching my son walk in behind her like none of this was strange, like bringing something, or someone, from another world into our home was just another Tuesday evening. The girl looked no older than 16, small and quiet, her dark eyes moving slowly across the room, as if she were memorizing every corner of it. There were no tears, no panic, none of the reactions I would have expected. Just stillness. The kind that makes you feel like you're the one being observed. "Mom, don't start," Daniel said before I even opened my mouth. "We know what we're doing." That sentence alone told me everything I needed to know. When a grown man has to say that out loud, it usually means he doesn't. Vanessa guided the girl forward, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor I had paid off 20 years ago, every step echoing like ownership. "She's valuable," Vanessa added, almost casually. "There are people who would pay a lot for something like this. But we're keeping her for now." For now? The way she said it made my stomach turn, not because of what it meant, but because of how easily she said it. Like she was talking about a piece of furniture. I looked at the girl again. Up close, there was something different about her, something I couldn't quite explain. Her posture was too composed, her breathing too steady, like none of this surprised her at all. Like she had already seen this moment play out before it happened. Our eyes met for a second, and in that brief moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. It passed quickly, but it was there. Vanessa pulled her forward again. "She'll clean, help around the house, whatever we need. She doesn't talk much anyway." The girl didn't react to that either. She just stood there, quiet and still, like she was waiting. Waiting for something none of us could see. I folded my hands together in front of me, the same way I used to when Daniel was a boy and brought home trouble he didn't understand yet. "What's her name?" I asked softly. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Does it matter?" I didn't look at Vanessa. I kept my eyes on the girl. After a moment, she spoke, her voice calm, almost gentle. "Lyra." Just that. No hesitation. No fear. Lyra. The name didn't sound like it belonged in my house, but somehow, it didn't feel out of place either. I nodded slowly. "Well, Lyra," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You're in my home now." Vanessa let out a short laugh. "Our home," she corrected. I didn't respond to that. Not because she was right, but because I had learned something over the years that Vanessa hadn't yet. Ownership isn't always about who says it out loud. Sometimes it's about who understands what's really happening. And right then, standing there in that quiet room, I had a feeling none of them understood anything at all. Lyra's gaze shifted back to me, and for the first time, something changed in her expression. Not fear, not relief, something else, something deeper. Then, in a voice so soft I almost missed it, she said, "They will come." I didn't ask who she meant. I didn't need to, because something in the way she said it told me one thing very clearly. Whatever my son and his wife had brought into this house, it wasn't something they were ever meant to keep. The next morning, the house felt different, not louder or quieter, but heavier, like something unseen had settled into the walls overnight and decided it was not leaving anytime soon. I woke up earlier than usual, long before the sun had fully risen over the Texas hills, and for a moment I almost convinced myself that everything from the night before had been some strange dream, the kind that lingers just long enough to make you question your memory. But then I heard the faint sound of movement from the kitchen, and I knew it was real. When I stepped into the hallway, I saw her already awake, standing by the window with her hands folded in front of her, looking out at the empty street like she was expecting someone to arrive. She was not wearing anything new, just one of my old cardigans that I had left on the chair, and somehow it looked more natural on her than it ever had. On me. "You should not be up this early," I said quietly, not wanting to startle her, but she did not flinch. She turned her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge me, and then looked back outside. "Time does not move the same way for me," she said, her voice calm and even, as if she were explaining something simple, something obvious. I stood there for a moment, trying to understand what that meant, but I had learned a long time ago that not every answer comes when you ask for it. So I let the silence sit between us. Down the hall, I heard Vanessa's voice, sharp and irritated, already on edge before the day had even begun. "Why is she just standing there?" she called out as she entered the kitchen, her eyes landing on Lyra like she was looking at a problem that needed to be solved. "If she is going to stay here, she needs to be useful." Daniel followed behind her, already dressed for work, his tie slightly crooked, his attention split between his phone and whatever plan Vanessa had decided was important that morning. "Just show her what to do," he said without looking up. "She will figure it out." Vanessa crossed her arms, clearly annoyed, but she moved closer anyway, gesturing toward the sink, the counter, the everyday tasks that fill a normal life. "You clean, you organize, you do what you are told," she said, her tone firm but not raised, the kind of voice people use when they think control comes from sounding certain. Lyra did not argue. She did not nod either. She simply moved when Vanessa stepped aside, her movements slow and precise, like she was not learning the space but studying it. Every object she touched, every step she took, it all felt deliberate, measured, as if she were mapping something invisible to the rest of us. I watched her for a while, longer than I meant to, and the more I looked, the more certain I became of something I could not quite explain. She was not adapting to this house. She was waiting in it. At one point, her hand paused over a glass on the counter, and for just a second, she looked directly at me again. "You should not worry," she said softly. "It will be over soon." I felt a chill move through me, not because of the words themselves, but because of how calmly she said them, like the ending of this story had already been decided, and she was the only one who had read the last page. From the other side of the room, Vanessa let out a short, impatient laugh. "I do not know what language she thinks she is speaking," she muttered, shaking her head. "But she better learn fast." Daniel finally looked up then, glancing between the two of them, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in his expression. Not doubt exactly, but something close to it. Something unsettled. He brushed it off quickly. Of course, people always do when they are not ready to question their own decisions. But it was there. And I knew that whatever Lyra had meant the night before, whatever was coming, it was already closer than any of us realized. By the afternoon, the house had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal if you did not look too closely. But I had lived long enough to know that normal is often just a thin layer covering something much deeper. Vanessa had already begun treating Lyra as part of the furniture, giving instructions without looking at her, expecting obedience without question, and what unsettled me most was not that Lyra followed those instructions, but how she did it. There was no hesitation, no confusion, no small mistakes that would suggest she was learning. Every movement was exact, as if she already understood how everything worked before she ever touched it. She folded laundry like she had done it 1,000 times, placed dishes in the cabinet without ever opening the wrong door, even adjusted the thermostat once when Vanessa complained about the temperature without being told where it was. It was not adaptation. It was precision. I sat at the kitchen table, pretending to read the same page of the newspaper for nearly an hour, watching her from the corner of my eye. And the longer I watched, the clearer it became that Lyra was not here to serve anyone. She was here for something else entirely. Around 3 in the afternoon, Daniel came home earlier than usual, something he rarely did, and the moment he stepped inside, he paused. It was subtle, just a fraction of a second, but I saw it. He felt it too. That shift in the air that you cannot explain but cannot ignore either. "Why is it so quiet?" he asked, loosening his tie as he walked into the living room. Vanessa did not look up from her phone. "Because things are finally under control," she said, her tone satisfied in a way that made me uneasy. Daniel glanced toward Lyra, who was standing near the hallway again, not doing anything in particular, just existing in that same still, deliberate way. "She is not causing any problems?" he asked. Vanessa let out a small laugh. "She barely talks. It is perfect." I almost said something then, something simple like that silence does not always mean peace, but I held my tongue. There is a difference between speaking and being heard, and I had learned which one mattered more in this house. Lyra shifted slightly, her gaze moving from Daniel to me, and for a moment, it felt like she was measuring something, like she was deciding where I stood in all of this. Then she walked closer, stopping just a few feet away from where I sat her day. "You should not stay near them when it begins," she said quietly, her voice low enough that Vanessa did not react, but Daniel did. He turned sharply, his brow furrowing. "What did she just say?" he asked. Vanessa waved a dismissive hand. It is just nonsense. She keeps saying strange things. Ignore it. But Daniel did not ignore it, not completely. I could see the uncertainty in his eyes now, the beginning of something cracking beneath the surface. What begins? He asked, this time directing the question toward Lyra. She did not answer right away. She simply looked at him, and there was something in her expression that made even me hold my breath. Not anger, not fear, something far more final. The part you cannot stop, she said. The room went still after that, the kind of stillness that makes every small sound feel too loud, the ticking clock on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator, even the faint wind outside brushing against the windows. Vanessa scoffed, clearly annoyed now. That is enough, she snapped. You do not get to stand there and talk like you are in charge of anything. Lyra did not react to her at all. Instead, she turned her attention back to me, and in that quiet, steady voice, she said, "It will not take long." And for the first time since she stepped into this house, I realized something with absolute clarity. She was not warning them. She was warning me. That evening, the sky turned a strange shade of gray long before the sun had fully set, and I noticed it the moment I stepped out onto the back porch with my cup of coffee, the air heavier than it should have been for a late Texas afternoon, like the weather itself was holding its breath. Inside, Vanessa was still talking, her voice sharp and restless as she went over plans I knew she had already repeated twice. Something about contacts and opportunities and timing. All the things people say when they believe they are in control of something they do not understand. Daniel responded less this time, his answers shorter, distracted, like part of him was somewhere else entirely, somewhere he could not quite reach. I stayed outside longer than I needed to, watching the horizon, trying to make sense of a feeling that had settled into my chest since morning, something between anticipation and certainty, and for a moment I found myself thinking about the years behind me instead of the hours ahead. There was a time when this house felt simple, when Daniel was just my son and not a man standing at the edge of something he could not see, when the biggest worry I had was whether the air conditioning would hold through another summer. Back then, I believed that time made things clearer, that if you waited long enough, everything would eventually make sense. But standing there with that strange sky stretching over me, I realized that sometimes time does not clarify anything at all. Sometimes it only reveals how little we truly understand. When I stepped back inside, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the kind that comes from an empty room, but the kind that replaces noise so suddenly it feels unnatural. Vanessa was no longer talking. Daniel was standing near the hallway, his posture stiff, his eyes fixed on something I could not see from where I stood. And Lyra was there, exactly where she had been before, except now the stillness around her felt different, heavier, like it was spreading outward instead of staying contained. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Daniel did not answer right away. He ran a hand through his hair, something he only did when he was unsettled, and then he finally spoke, his voice low. "The power just dropped for a second," he said. Everything flickered. Vanessa crossed her arms, clearly irritated, but there was something else beneath it now, something she was trying not to show. "It is probably just a storm," she said quickly. "This happens all the time." But it did not. Not like this. I could feel it in the walls, in the floor beneath my feet, in the way the air seemed to press in from all sides. This was not weather. Lyra turned her head slowly toward me, her expression unchanged, but her eyes sharper now, more focused, like whatever she had been waiting for had finally begun. "It has started," she said. Vanessa let out a short, dismissive laugh, but it came too fast, too forced. "Nothing has started," she snapped. "You do not get to decide that." Lyra did not respond to her. She never did. Instead, she took a single step forward, her gaze never leaving mine. "You should come with me," she said, her voice calm, almost gentle. For a moment, I did not move. Not because I did not understand what she was asking, but because I understood it too well. This was the line, the moment where everything would divide into before and after, and there would be no going back once it was crossed. Behind me, Vanessa's voice rose, sharper now, edged with something closer to panic than anger. "She is not going anywhere," she said. "Do you hear me? She stays right here." Daniel looked between the two of them, his uncertainty now impossible to hide, his confidence slipping in a way I had not seen since he was a boy. "Vanessa, maybe we should just slow down," he said, but even he did not sound convinced. I looked at Lyra again, at the quiet certainty in her expression, at the way she stood as if the outcome of this moment had already been decided long before any of us realized we were part of it. Then I set my coffee cup down on the table, steadying my hands without thinking, and took a step forward. Because deep down, I already knew something Vanessa and Daniel were only just beginning to feel. Whatever was coming was not asking for permission. The moment I stepped closer to Lyra, something in the air shifted again, not violently, not in any way you could point to and explain, but enough that I felt it deep in my chest, like the pressure change before a storm finally breaks. Behind me, Vanessa's voice rose sharper, louder, her controls slipping in small cracks she could not seal fast enough. "Evelyn, stop," she said, her heels striking the floor as she moved toward us. "You do not know what you are doing." I did not turn around, not because I was ignoring her, but because I had already spent too many years turning back when someone else raised their voice. At some point, you realize that volume does not equal truth. "I know enough," I said quietly. That was all I gave her. Daniel shifted uneasily near the doorway, his gaze moving between us like he was trying to find the right place to stand and realizing there was not one. "Mom, maybe we should just sit down and talk about this," he said, but there was no direction in his voice, no real conviction. He was not leading anything anymore. He was reacting. Lyra stepped forward then, not fast, not dramatic, just one calm step that somehow changed the entire room. "It is too late for that," she said softly. The lights flickered again, this time longer, the hum of the house dropping into silence for a breath before returning, but weaker somehow, like something was interfering with it from beyond our walls. Vanessa froze for a moment, her confidence finally cracking into something closer to uncertainty. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, but her voice did not carry the same certainty anymore. Outside, a low vibration began, so faint at first I thought I imagined it, but then it grew, not loud, not overwhelming, just steady, constant, like something enormous moving at a distance you could not measure. Daniel turned toward the windows, his face tightening. "Do you hear that?" he asked. No one answered, because we all did. Lyra's gaze never left me. "You should stay near me now," she said, her voice still calm, still controlled, as if everything unfolding around us was exactly as expected. I nodded before I even realized I was doing it. Not out of fear, but because something in me understood that this was the only decision that made sense anymore. Vanessa stepped forward again, this time faster, her hand reaching out as if she could physically pull the situation back into something she recognized. "She is not going anywhere," she repeated, but the words sounded thinner now, like they were losing weight as soon as they left her mouth. "You do not get to take anything from me." Lyra did not even look at her. "Nothing here belongs to you," she said quietly. That was the first time her voice carried something different. Not anger, not emotion, just certainty, absolute and unmoving. The vibration outside deepened, and the windows trembled slightly in their frames, not enough to break, just enough to remind us how fragile everything around us really was. Daniel took a step back, his breathing uneven now. "Vanessa, what did we bring into this house?" he asked, and for the first time, he sounded like someone who did not have the answer. Vanessa opened her mouth, ready to respond, ready to regain control the only way she knew how, but no words came out. Because deep down, she knew it too. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time since this all began, I did not see someone in charge. I saw someone who had mistaken possession for power. And those two things are never the same. Lyra moved closer to me, just within reach, and the moment she did, the air seemed to settle slightly around us, like we were standing in the one place untouched by whatever was approaching. "It will end quickly," she said, her voice softer now, almost reassuring. I believed her, not because I understood what she meant, but because everything else had already proven she did not speak without knowing. And as that low, steady vibration continued to rise beyond the walls of my home, I realized something with complete clarity. This was never about what Daniel and Vanessa had taken. It was about what was coming to take her back. The vibration outside did not stop. It deepened, spreading through the ground beneath the house like something vast was settling into place just beyond what we could see. And for a moment, no one moved. Not Vanessa, not Daniel, not even me. Because there are moments when your body understands before your mind can catch up, and all it tells you is to stay still. The lights flickered again, but this time they did not fully come back, leaving the room dim, washed in a strange half-light that made everything feel unreal, like we had already stepped outside of the world we knew without realizing it. Daniel moved first, taking a cautious step toward the window, his hand hovering near the glass but not touching it, like he was afraid even that small contact might confirm something he was not ready to accept. "There is something out there," he said, his voice low, almost disbelieving, and I could hear it now more clearly. That low, steady presence, not a sound exactly, but a pressure, like the air itself was being held in place by something far larger than our understanding. Vanessa shook her head quickly, her voice rising again, trying to push everything back into something familiar. "No, this is just a storm. It has to be," she said. But even as she spoke, she glanced toward the window, and I saw it in her eyes, that moment where belief starts to fracture. Lyra did not look outside. She did not need to. She stood beside me, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady, like she had been standing in this exact moment before, somewhere else, sometime else, and nothing about it surprised her. "They are here," she said quietly. Daniel turned sharply. "Who is here?" he demanded, but his voice did not carry authority anymore, only urgency. Lyra finally shifted her gaze toward him, and there was something in her expression that made him take a step back without thinking. "Those who do not lose what is theirs," she said. The words settled into the room with a weight that no one could ignore. Vanessa let out a short, strained laugh, but it sounded hollow now, like she was trying to convince herself more than anyone else. "This is insane," she said, her voice thinner than before. "We found her. We brought her here. That makes her ours." Lyra did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at Vanessa with a calm that made every word Vanessa had just said sound smaller. "You do not own what you cannot understand," she replied. The house trembled slightly, just enough to make a picture frame on the wall tilt. Out of place, and Daniel reached out instinctively to steady it, but his hand paused halfway, like even that simple action no longer felt certain. Outside, the sky had darkened completely now, not like night, but like something was blocking the light itself, and for the first time, I realized we were not waiting for something to arrive. It had already arrived. "We need to leave," Daniel said suddenly, turning back toward us, his voice tight, controlled in a way that told me he was trying not to panic. "Whatever this is, we should not be here when it gets worse." Vanessa turned toward him, disbelief flashing across her face. "Leave?" she repeated. "We are not leaving. We are not giving up everything because of some noise and a few flickering lights." Daniel hesitated, caught between the two realities standing in front of him, the one he had believed in and the one unfolding whether he accepted it or not. I watched him for a moment, my son who had always thought decisions were about control, about choosing the outcome you wanted, and I wondered if he was beginning to understand that some things do not offer that choice. Lyra stepped slightly closer to me, and the air around us felt clearer somehow, steadier, like we were standing in the only place untouched by whatever force pressed against the rest of the world. "You can leave," she said softly, not looking at Daniel or Vanessa, only at me. "But it will not change anything." Her words did not sound like a warning. They sounded like a fact. And in that moment, standing in a house that no longer felt entirely like mine, I realized that whatever was happening outside was not something we could escape. It was something that had come with a purpose, and it had already found exactly what it was looking for. The moment the sound outside changed, I knew we had crossed into something none of us could undo, not because it grew louder, but because it became clearer, defined in a way that removed all doubt that it was real. It was no longer just a vibration beneath the ground or a pressure in the air. It was presence. Daniel stepped back from the window slowly, his face pale now, the confidence he carried earlier gone completely, replaced by something far more honest. "There is something in the sky," he said, his voice low, almost unsteady, like he was describing something his mind could not fully process. Vanessa moved toward him quickly, her heels sharp against the floor, but when she reached the window, she stopped just as abruptly as he had. I did not need to look to know what she saw. I could feel it in the way the house seemed smaller, like the space around us was being compressed by something vast beyond it. "This is not possible," she whispered, her voice stripped of its earlier certainty. That was the moment her control broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in that quiet admission that the world was no longer behaving the way she expected it to. Lyra remained beside me, unmoved, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged, as if this was simply the next step in a sequence she had always known would happen. "They will not enter by force," she said calmly. "They do not need to." Daniel turned toward her quickly. "Then what are they waiting for?" he asked, and there was something almost desperate in his voice now. Lyra did not answer right away. She looked toward the front door, not directly, but just enough to draw our attention there. And in that small shift, I understood. Whatever was coming did not need to break anything. It only needed to be acknowledged. The air shifted again, and then there was a sound. Not a knock, not something human, but a soft, deliberate tone, like a signal being placed exactly where it was meant to be heard. Vanessa froze, her eyes wide, her breath shallow. "Do not open that door," she said quickly, her voice sharp again, but now it carried fear instead of authority. Daniel did not move. He stood there, caught between instinct and reality, and I could see it in him. That moment where a man realizes he has stepped into something he cannot control or explain. I looked at the door, then at Lyra, and then back at the door again. The sound came once more, just as calm, just as certain, and I realized something with complete clarity. This was not a demand. It was a request. And requests, when they come from something powerful enough to wait instead of force, are never meant to be ignored. "Evelyn, do not," Vanessa said, stepping forward, her voice rising again, but it was too late. I had already made my decision. Not out of courage, not out of defiance, but because something in me understood that this moment was not about stopping anything. It was about allowing what had already begun to unfold. I walked toward the door slowly, each step steady, each breath measured, and as I reached for the handle, I felt the house settle behind me, like it was finally giving way to something it had been holding back. Daniel said my name once, quietly, not to stop me, but because he did not know what else to do. Vanessa said nothing. When I opened the door, there was no explosion of light, no overwhelming force, no chaos. Just stillness. And standing beyond that threshold, in a space that did not feel entirely like our world anymore, were figures that did not need to move to be understood. The air around them carried a quiet authority, not aggressive, not threatening, just absolute. I stepped aside without thinking, and for the first time since all of this began, Lyra moved past me without hesitation. As she crossed the threshold, the pressure in the air shifted instantly, lifting in a way that made the entire house feel lighter, as if something heavy had just been removed from it. Behind me, Vanessa took a step forward, her voice breaking as she called out, "You cannot just take her." But even as she said it, the words sounded empty. Because deep down, she finally understood. No one was taking anything. They were simply reclaiming what had never belonged to her. For a moment, nothing moved. Not the figures outside, not Lyra, not even the air between us. It was the kind of stillness that does not come from emptiness, but from something so complete it does not need motion to be understood. Lyra stepped forward fully into that space, and the moment she did, everything about her changed in a way that was impossible to ignore. Not her face, not her form, but the way the space around her responded, like the world itself was adjusting to her presence rather than the other way around. The figures beyond the threshold lowered their heads in unison, not dramatically, not for show, but with a precision that spoke of something far older than habit. Respect. Not the kind that is given, but the kind that is recognized. Daniel took a step closer behind me, his voice barely more than a breath. "Who are they?" he asked, but I could tell he already understood that the answer was not something he would fully grasp. Lyra did not look back at him. Her attention remained forward, steady, unwavering. "They are mine," she said simply. Not possessive, not proud, just certain. Vanessa let out a sharp, disbelieving sound, her mind still trying to force everything back into something she could control. "This is not real," she said quickly. "This cannot be real." But her voice trembled now, and the more she spoke, the less convincing it sounded, even to herself. One of the figures stepped forward then, not crossing into the house, not forcing anything, just closing the distance enough to be seen clearly, and though I could not describe them in any way that would make sense in the world I had known my whole life, I understood one thing immediately. They were not here to negotiate. They were here because something important had been misplaced, and they had found it. "We have located you," the figure said, their voice carrying not through sound, but through something deeper, something that settled into your thoughts without needing permission. Lyra inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the words as if they were part of a conversation that had been paused rather than begun. "I was never lost," she replied. There was no defiance in her tone, only truth. Behind me, Vanessa stepped forward again, her fear finally turning into something louder, something desperate. "You cannot just walk in here and take her," she said, her voice rising, trying to reclaim authority that had already slipped through her fingers. "We brought her here. We found her." The figure did not respond to her, not because they could not, but because she did not matter in the way she thought she did. That was the part that broke her. Not anger, not confrontation, just being unseen. Daniel stood frozen, his eyes fixed on Lyra, and for the first time since he was a child, I saw him look at something without trying to control it, without trying to understand it, just accepting that it was beyond him. "Mom," he said quietly, but he did not finish the sentence. He did not know how. Lyra turned then, just slightly, her gaze returning to me, and everything else seemed to fade for a moment. The figures, the house, even the weight in the air. "You chose correctly," she said, her voice softer now, almost warm. It was not praise. It was acknowledgement. And in that small moment, I understood something I had not realized before. This had never been about them. It had never been about what Daniel and Vanessa had done or what they thought they owned. It had been about choice, about who saw clearly and who did not. Lyra turned back toward the threshold, and the figures stepped aside without needing to be told, creating space not out of submission, but out of recognition. She moved forward without hesitation, and as she did, the air shifted again, the pressure lifting completely, like something that had been waiting had finally reached its end. Vanessa's voice broke behind me, quieter now, stripped of everything but disbelief. This is not how this was supposed to go. No, it was not. But then again, it had never been her story to decide. After Lyra crossed the threshold, the space beyond the door seemed to close around her, not physically, but in a way that made it clear she no longer belonged to this place, or perhaps she never had. The figures shifted slightly, not surrounding her, not guiding her, but aligning with her presence as if she were the center of something much larger than any of us could see. The air inside the house grew lighter with each second, the pressure dissolving until the walls felt like walls again, and the floor beneath my feet felt solid in a way it had not since the night before. It was over, not with noise or chaos, but with quiet certainty. Daniel stood beside me, still staring at the doorway like he expected something else to happen, something louder, something that would make sense of what he had just witnessed. "She just left," he said finally, his voice hollow, like the words did not carry meaning yet. I did not correct him, because she had not left. She had returned. Vanessa did not move for several seconds, her eyes fixed on the empty space where Lyra had stood, her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and something far more fragile. "No," she said under her breath, shaking her head slowly. "No, that is not possible. That is not how this works." But nothing about this had ever worked the way she thought it would. That was the part she could not accept. She took a step toward the door, then stopped, her hand lifting slightly, as if she might reach for something that was no longer there. But she did not cross the threshold. She could not, because deep down, she understood what the rest of us were only beginning to grasp. Whatever had been beyond that door was not something you approached unless you were meant to. I closed the door gently, not to shut anything out, but because there was nothing left to hold open. The moment it clicked into place, the house felt still again, completely still, like the world had returned to its original shape without needing to explain how. Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face as if trying to wake himself from something he could not fully process. "What just happened?" he asked, but he was not asking me. He was asking the silence, hoping it would answer him. Vanessa finally turned, her expression sharp again, but weaker now, like it was built on something that had already collapsed. "We lost everything," she said, her voice tight. "Do you understand that? Everything." I looked at her for a moment, really looked at her, and for the first time, I did not feel frustration or disappointment. I felt clarity. "No," I said calmly. "You never had anything to lose." The words landed quietly, but they carried more weight than anything that had been said that night. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because there was nothing left to argue. No leverage. No control. No illusion to stand on. Daniel sank into the chair near the wall, his posture heavy, his thoughts clearly unraveling in ways he had not prepared for. I watched him for a moment, my son, who had spent so much of his life believing that everything could be owned, managed, or controlled if you just moved fast enough. Now he was sitting in a house that had just proven him wrong in the most absolute way possible. I turned toward the hallway, toward the quiet rooms that suddenly felt like mine again, not because anything had changed physically, but because something had been restored. Not taken. Not fought for. Simply recognized. As I walked away, I heard Daniel's voice again, softer this time. Mom, why did she talk to you like that? I paused, considering the question, then answered without turning back. Because I listened. That was all there was to it. Not strength. Not luck. Just the simple act of seeing something for what it was before it revealed itself to everyone else. And as the house settled into a calm it had not known since before Lyra arrived, I realized something I would carry with me long after this night was gone. The most powerful people are not always the ones who speak the loudest or act the fastest. Sometimes, they are the ones who recognize the truth before it becomes impossible to ignore.